mother never knew what I did for a living. And I sold all these big shows like Seinfeld and Raymond. She's like, Adam, where's your credit? And I'm like, Mom, I'm not a producer. I'm just an agent. And then when she died and I formed my own company, I wanted to name it after my mother so she can see her name on the screen.
Beautiful.
Adam, how did you start your career? Tell us.
I knew nothing about television. I actually grew up in the suburbs of Long Island without a lot of money. I always had jobs like delivering newspapers. I was a janitor at my temple. I was a busboy. I shoveled snow. My father's first cousin was the president of the William Morris Agency. We didn't really know them because they were very rich. We weren't, but they grew up together because their grandparents all came from Eastern Europe. And I met my father's, because they were my first cousins once removed at my aunt's house. My Aunt Sally was she was like the woman in Driving Miss Daisy, and she was a tough cookie, and she's like, do you want to work at the office this summer? I didn't know what the office was, and my father said, you should do it, it'd be fun. This was in the late 70s, and it was impossible to get a job in that office unless you really knew someone, and most of the summer employees were very wealthy. So I went in for my interview, I left school, I took the train in, the guy kept me waiting 45 minutes, and I get into his office, I'm very nervous, and he's like, it's a terrible job, you have to drive the buses around, you have to go out late, you have to take the subway and all over, and you have to take the buses and the humidity, and you have to go to the attic, and you have to get the files, and you have to go to the basement, and there's cobwebs, and he's like, do you want the job? And I'm like, yes. He said, when do you finish school? I go, the end. Most kids did not need this job. He goes, when did you finish school? I go, the end of June. He goes, well, call us in the beginning of June, but it's highly unlikely there'll be a job. And I said, well, I need to know now because I need to get a job. He goes, you should look for another job. I get up and I leave, and as I leave, he looks at my resume and he says, I see you referred by Mr. Lefkowitz. How do you know him? I said, he's my uncle. He said, let us know the day you want to start working. That was my first entree into how things work. And I worked every summer, every Christmas vacation, and they loved me, of course. And then the next question is going to be how I fell in love with Israel, probably. So after college, I grew up, we were conservative, but we were like, we'd have Chinese food on paper plates. We weren't really that religious. I only went to temple twice a year, but probably a lot of Jewish culture in my house. I went backpacking in Israel. I went backpacking in Europe after college. I had a job on Wall Street, and I always wanted to go to Israel. And my friend was studying at Tel Aviv University, and I gave up my job, which was my mother was freaking out, and I came to Israel, and I fell in love with the country, and I worked on a kibbutz, and I made baby food, and I made dog food, and I cleaned the fish, and I picked a farsimone, and I did an army program for 4 months, and I fell in love. I felt like this is my homeland. I think in another life I was Israeli. As soon as I landed, I'm like, I'm home, and I'd never been there before. And then I had to leave, and I wanted to make Aliyah, but the two types of people that make Aliyah are Jews that plan for years to make Aliyah, or really fucked up Jews that like don't know what they're doing with their life, and they'll just move somewhere to Israel to get away from their family and their friends and start afresh. And I came from a very stable, loving background, and I had to go home. So I came home, and I was going to move in 2 years. And then I started working at the William Morris Agency in the mailroom. And then my aunt, who I said was like very heavy, headstrong, she every time I went out with her, she'd invite me to the Russian tea room once a week. But she was in a wheelchair, so I was like the driver in Driving Miss Daisy. I'd take her into the Russian tea room. Everyone would come up to the table to talk to her. She'd tell everyone, I'm her nephew and I'm a lawyer. And I never went to law school. It was the most embarrassing thing. Where she'd say, oh, he's in law school. And because my uncle started working at William Morris in 1925 and went to law school at night. So she wanted me to do that. So she shamed me into going to law school. And she paid for my law school. And we weren't even that close growing up. She changed my life. I owe this woman everything. I fell into a profession I knew nothing about, that I happened to be very good at, that I love. And it's provided a life of incredible and rich opportunities. And I I wasn't going to go back to Israel because, I just spent 4 years going to law school at night, working 40 hours and then studying for the bar and having to staff writers in the law library. But I always wanted to help Israel and I didn't know how I could help. And then when In Treatment was sold, I realized I could help Israel through being a TV agent in America. And then I met Orly. And she had a very famous Israeli teen show called Hamama. And we decided we were going to sell it to Netflix. It was much easier to sell things to Netflix in those days. It was the nascent days of Netflix. I already sold House of Cards. I was sort of very well known there. It was like 4 people that worked at Netflix. And you tell the story.
I'll tell the story? No, you tell the story. You do it better.
Well, we sold the show and they did 44 episodes. It's the first Israeli original show that was ever on Netflix. And then Dana and I sold Fauda together. I sold a lot of Israeli shows, probably like 15 or 20. But I also brought a delegation from America every year to Israel, important people in Hollywood. And we went to all these amazing sites and met all these amazing people and had a lot of fun. And people said to me, why do you love Israel so much? Like, where does it come from? And I really didn't know. And then my youngest son is 24. I had to write his bar mitzvah speech. And 11 years ago, and I found my bar mitzvah speech when I was 13. And my entire bar mitzvah speech was that the Jews have wandered around the world, lost for 2,000 years, and we finally have our homeland. And it's not only up to Israelis to make the homeland safe, we all have to do it, we all have to do our part. So I knew that when I was 13. That's why I think I must have been Israeli.
Wow, and your daughter did Aliyah.
My daughter lives here, she's Israeli, and she's getting married April 30th at Ronit Farms.
Wow.
To an Israeli.
Yeah, she came to work with us in Ananey for
Oh yeah,
few years.
this is a funny story. She's like, she wanted to work in children's TV. So I said, my clients are Nickelodeon Israel, I can get you the job. So I tell her she has the job, you have to still meet Orly. Instead, she posts on her Facebook that she got this job and she's moving to Israel. I'm like, Natalie, you can't do that. You have to meet the people first. She said, but Dad, you told me I had the job.
Luckily, it was all good.
She was great, right?
She was great. Especially helping us to understand the culture of Netflix that day because we were doing the Hamama. So we spoke about which was the first one, but which show was the most meaningful for you? Israeli show.
Well, I'll say show in general. Which show is the most meaningful for me? I mean, I've sold a lot of really well-known shows, but the most meaningful show out of all the shows was Fauda. Because Fauda shows that there's no black and white and that it's a gray area, and there's conflict on both sides, and there's pain on both sides, and also was distributed in 160 countries, and people had never heard, they watched the subtitles, but they had never heard Hebrew before in their life, and I felt like, this is great, like that I could do this with Dana and get the world to view a show in Hebrew about our conflict that no one really understood, and maybe it'll give them a little more understanding. So, even though House of Cards was the first Netflix show, I think this was the most meaningful.
Wow. And what changed after the 7 in October in your eyes?
Nothing.
No,
It's a joke. It's a joke. Well, the world's changed. It's gone to a very dark spot. And regarding Israeli TV, they took a pause. But I think that people will start to buy Israeli TV again if it's the right show. They're not going to not buy a show because it's in Hebrew, because it's subtitled anyway. It has to be the concept and it has to be the type of show. I think it's very hard to sell shows today in America, and it's very hard to sell shows in different languages. And it doesn't matter if it's Hebrew or Spanish or French or Hindi. It's just hard.
It does matter because Hebrew is, only in Israel we speak Hebrew.
It's harder than Spanish because Spanish has a bigger audience, but it's more about the show than the language of the show. And if you think about it, really Netflix was the only streamer that really bought a lot of international shows. And that was their goal, to buy international shows for a global audience. And now they've changed their strategy. They're trying to buy shows only in local markets. So they'll buy a Israeli show only for be shown in Israel after it's shown in Hot or Yes or Khan or Reshet or Keshet. That's not that helpful if you're putting together the financing for a show. So it's more challenging than it's been in the past, and that's not because of October 7th. And there's also less platforms now. So for instance, I sold shows to Stars International, I sold shows to AMC, Showtime was buying shows. Now Amazon almost never buys international shows, so you really have HBO Max used to buy international shows, they're not doing it anymore. Dan and I sold a show to HBO Max. So now you really have Apple, which just bought a Keshet show, which is great for everyone here, and it's the first show that's been bought since the war. And you have, once in a while Netflix will buy a show not for Israel like they did with Bad Boys, which is great, but that's an outlier these days. That's not really happening. So hopefully Paramount Plus is gonna now buy shows because they bought Red Alert, and we'll have to see. But it's more promising than it was a year ago for sure, and less promising than it was 4 years ago.
So this is for Israel, but I saw that you, in the last few years, you did a lot of international shows, like 6 new shows you sold, and you are the executive producer of those shows, and also in different languages.
I'm an executive producer or involved in producing 6 shows in 4 different languages, and I only speak English. So there's hope for anyone who can't speak.
So what do you say about the international?
I mean, the reason why the world is global now. And I think that the price point of shows internationally are much better than shooting shows in America. It just has to be the right show on the right budget with the right actor. So if you can shoot a show net $5 to $7 million with a big star, and it's in English, and it's what the streamers are looking for, no limited series, no period pieces, and something with a big hook that will attract an international audience, then you can sell it. I think that's the way television's going. And I think with AI, AI is on a large level. I know Eric spoke about AI yesterday and the pros and cons for TV, but on a global level, it's very scary. Nothing to do with business, but in the business I'm doing in terms of working with international shows, it's a positive because everyone will be speaking English. So that's not necessarily good for the actors or the actresses. I don't know how that's going to work, but for actually selling the show where you don't have to dub it and it's like it's being filmed in English, I think that would be a big positive, and also will lower the costs, which will make it more appealing. As long as you have a great concept and great actors and a great show, you need all that. You're not just going to sell a show because, people are speaking English or it's cheaper.
I wanted to ask you about the microdrama, the genre that just
Susan
started.
spoke about microdramas yesterday, and
Okay. So
wherever she is, she did a great job. I think it's really exciting because the golden era of television, as we know it, is sort of over in terms of shows and in terms of financing, and we need alternative models. And the attention span of people in the world has decreased rapidly between TikTok and Instagram. And if you can shoot really short shows that hold people's attention and that aren't expensive, and then you can shoot them around the world in different languages, and you can localize them for not a lot of money for different countries, it could be a huge business. I don't know anything about it personally, but that's my take on seeing the future of it.
And I can't end this interview without asking you about the big deal between Netflix and Warner Brothers, which I'm personally very disappointed. I thought my bosses will buy it. I thought I'm now representing Warner Brothers as well. I'm not. What do you think about it?
I'll just start back by saying that when I sold House of Cards and then Orange is the New Black was sold, all the agents were like high-fiving, like this is the greatest thing. They spent $146 million on House of Cards off of a script. Queen's Gambit, Cindy Holland picked up the series just based off a script, and then the clients got a $7 million advance, and then we sold Central Park 5, and they gave us $11 million. It was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And my good friend John Landgraf said, it's destroying the business. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, all this money, it's great. He said, it's like you start doing cocaine and it feels good, then you do crack and you're dead. Well, now the market Netflix has taken over the entire market, and they've turned it around and they've sort of, I hesitate to use the word ruin the TV business, but this business has been ended up being changed in a very not positive way, and they're already extremely powerful, and I think it's going to be very not a positive for our business. And it's just all consolidation's bad, but a consolidation like this is going to be really bad. And also, you're going to lose the streaming service for sure. So there won't be any more HBO Max, and they'll just be distributing to themselves, most likely, even though they say they won't. And even though they say they'll put the movies in the movie theaters, they probably won't, or they'll do it for a very short amount of time. Whatever they say, just think the opposite.
Oh wow! But someone told me today that means that Paramount has a lot of free cash now to spend. Maybe
In Israel.
Yeah, it should be in Israel. Okay, if anyone has some question to Adam?
I'm wondering if you had discussions with people in LA or in the industry about the proposed 100% tariffs on stuff not made in America.
It seems to be so ridiculous because most of the shows and movies that are not made in America are made by American companies. I don't think our fearless leader understands that. But we haven't been talking about it that much. He's got bigger issues, I think, than worrying about that at the moment.
A lot of Israeli shows such as the Fauda, are very, very popular in India, and so many shows that I know have been remade, as Indian original series. So how do you look at India as a market, and what are the possibilities of having Indo-Israeli collaborations? Since I'm a film critic, this area really interests me.
I know India. I have clients in India. I've been to Mumbai. There's more English-speaking people in India than there are in America. So that's a positive. The negative is the financial model, because it's so cheap to get programming on your phones. That has to make sense. But I also believe that India hasn't really hit it with a big TV show. Like in features, they had Slumdog Millionaire, and they've had others, and they're going to do it. I'm very committed to the Indian market. I know a lot of the players there. I represent Samir Nair. I don't know if you know him. And
Applause.
and I actually, one of the shows I was involved in, which is Gandhi, it had its global premiere at Toronto. And Hanson Mehta directed it, and it's fantastic. So I believe in the Indian market.
Thank you so much.
You have to do things other than crime thrillers, though.
Exactly.
Every show is a crime thriller. Woo!
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Of course.
Okay, good.
Okay, so in our studio, the Have Innovation Studio, we made a few cooperations that were a triangle between either American or Canadian, Israeli, and Indian. It worked wonderfully. And I had this idea that this triangle might be a very strong one. How do you view this triangle of cooperation in the future between?
You mean doing a triple production?
Yes, between Israel, India, and the States.
To air in each local market? It's complicated. You have to come up with a story that appeals across the world. But you can do it. We can do anything, right? So have to come up with it.
Anyone else? Okay, so I will thank you, Adam, and sorry for being so nervous and get mistakes.
Take care.